There's this commonly told story. The first patent was granted to a man in Florence during the 15th century. It symbolized the birth of intellectual property and celebrated innovation. But was it true? If we dive deeper, we see that this man didn't really receive a patent, it was a privilege. What's more, this man wasn't an inventor, he was a sculptor. And from there, things get even more complicated. By the end of this episode, you'll have learned an extraordinary amount about patents, mainly who was awarded the first modern one. Today, we often take patents for granted. We see them as part of a fluid system that does a very, very good job at protecting the innovator while promoting innovation. As James Madison, one of America's founding fathers, wrote in the Federalist Papers, he said that patents, quote, are the protections of the labors of the mind. But creating a system to protect these innovations is a labor that has lasted centuries. Through examining patent history, we'll explore the inherent struggles in protecting individual property. Finally, we'll set the stage for what all of this means in the proverbial age of AI. Who reserves the right to an invention if they directed someone else to do the labor? And if that someone, it's really just something. In this episode, we'll distinguish between patents and privilege, protection, and property. We'll come to understand that patents, like the inventions that they serve to protect, have not just one purpose. Patents were created in different eras for different means, some to promote innovation, while others were, quite simply, just meant to generate revenue for the king and queen. So, with all of this being said, what was the first patent ever? Was it for a salt recipe or a steam engine? Stained glass or a simple map? The idea of owning a work that's recognized by a larger body that entitles you to compensation for that work is a concept that dates way further back than the internet can crawl. But that's why we have the first podcast, to make sense of it all. This is the story of the first patent in history and why we may soon, see the last. I'm Paul Nyhart, I'm your host, and we'll get through this one together. All right, so to understand and to really identify what the first patent was in history, we have to set the rules as to what a patent is. Now, for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on utility patents. In order for something to be a patent, it number one must be patented for at least 15 to 20 years. Yeah, that's the modern patent system, which I'm not sure a lot of people really know of, is that when you file a patent, it's not for perpetuity. No, there's a limit on it for about anywhere from 15 to 20 years. Many of the patents that we'll explore, they didn't have that time period. They didn't have that length of time, ergo, they're thrown out the window. Another thing that we're going to look at is that the patent can't be for a monopoly or a simple service. It must be for an invention. Again, the idea of a utility patent. Also, the patent couldn't have been somebody that was a third party to this invention. It must be a patent given to the original inventor. With all that good stuff being said, what is the first patent? All right, so let's flash back to the 15th century in Italy, like I talked about at the beginning of this episode. There's a design contest across Florence, and it's not for who can come up with the best design, but rather who can bring a particular design to life. The design is of a huge dome. It's gigantic, and it's to be built on top of a cathedral, beautiful cathedral. It's been there for over 100 years. But there's a bit of a catch. You see, this cathedral has a hole in the middle of its ceiling, and there's actually rainwater coming through. The contest, whoever wins the bid gets 200 gold flora. Yeah. Gold flora, that equates to 200 is about 600 grams of gold based on research. 600 grams of gold is about 200 men's wedding bands, ladies. This is about 5 to 10 grams is your standard men's band. So if you carry the one, add a bunch of rings together, you stack them on top. Yeah, 300 wedding bands is what this bid or this contract was worth. The project, it would go not to an engineer. It was the son of a well-known public servant, and his name was Filippo Brunelleschi. Some 20 years prior to this contest, the other competition he was a part of was for the design of new bronze doors for the Baptistry of Florence. This was the same building that eventually would have designs from Donatello and Michelangelo, so it obviously was a building in a contest of high esteem. It was said that though the contest wanted to award him and another gentleman as both winners, dual winners, a tie, and they wanted them to collaborate on the final project. Well, that's not something it's safe to say Brunelleschi was interested in doing. He hid most of his bronze designs throughout the contest, and by the result of this particular contest, that it said that he left Florence altogether. 20 years later to this contest, yeah, he was even more tight-lipped about how his process, or about his particular processes. He didn't let anybody in on it and didn't want to collaborate with anybody. His solution to this engineering challenge was to actually build two domes. Remember, he didn't have wood to support the structures, so he built one dome and put it inside of the other. Now, this dome had a diameter of 180 feet. Yes. For those scoring at home, that's almost twice the size of the US Capitol dome. And it had an estimated 4 million bricks. Now, all of this would need to be lifted and built on top of a church, again with no wood to support it. Basically, he was using pulleys, animals, all types of counterweights, stacking the bricks and formations in ways people had never seen before. The government wanted to know how he was doing this. So they granted him what is widely recognized as the first patent in history in order to entice him to spill the beans. But what was the one thing, or at least the first thing, that Brunelleschi demanded? Well, the first patent was for a new boat. It was called Il Bandolone, dubbed the Monster. I probably mispronounced the the boat was called the Monster. The Italian, don't worry about it. But it was an amphibious boat that would allow him to transport his materials, at least quite literally on paper, from the land. Now, the patent itself from the Florence government, they said, I'll cut some pieces together, but you'll get the gist. It said, considering that the admirable Filippo Brunelleschi has invented some machine or kind of ship and refuses to make such machine available to the public, in order that the fruit of his genius and skill may not be reaped by another, no person alive may commit any of the following acts on the river Arno, any other river, stagnant water, swamp, or water running or existing in the territory of Florence. If any ship or thing pretending to be one does this, it shall be burned. So it was a 3-year patent. Basically, they gave him everything that he wanted. It said, hey, you got 3 years, you got a monopoly on this. Nobody can pretend to do anything you're doing. Not in a river, not in a swamp, nowhere. Just tell us, tell us how you're gonna make this boat, because we don't want you to keep it a secret. Even though his competitors, his rivals, never thought this boat would work. They were convinced he was crazy. One allegedly said he would kill himself if this boat was actually going to come to fruition. Brunelleschi's invention was so brilliant, it didn't really create the first patent based on all that being said, but it did create the first impetus for a government to want to collaborate with an inventor, to encourage them to give away some of their knowledge in exchange for knowing their rivals wouldn't take advantage of it. Brunelleschi's dome still exists today, and along with it, many of the innovations that Brunelleschi used to bring the dome to life. It is still the largest masonry vault in the world, made entirely of brick and stone. Of course, the first privilege that is dubbed sort of a patent, well, it didn't work. It failed. On its maiden voyage, it apparently sunk to the river floor. Putting the failure of the boat aside, why do people recognize this as the first patent? Well, you flat out have the Florence government saying, hey, like no one can do anything related to this person's invention whatsoever. The difference in why we don't recognize it as a patent today is that one, it was only for 3 years. This patent protection was 3 years. Number two, he didn't prove that it worked whatsoever. On the contrary, on the maiden voyage, it sank. He didn't prove that this was something that even needed patent protection. Brunelleschi's invention, it didn't really create the first patent based on all that being said, but it did create the first impetus for a government to want to collaborate with an inventor, to encourage them to give away some of their knowledge in exchange for knowing their rivals wouldn't take advantage of it. Now, the Patent Act of 1474 was drafted in a different region of Italy, Venice, but it was heavily influenced by Brunelleschi's reluctance to share his design. It said every person who shall build any new and ingenious device in this city, not previously made in our Commonwealth, shall give notice of it to the office of our General Welfare Board when it has been reduced to perfection so that it can be used and operated. So this act both calls out the solitary nature of inventors and says, hey, if you make something, you kind of have to tell us. That's one reading of it. But number two, again, it says when it has been perfected. It's not when you tell us it's ready, it's when you can prove that it is worth its weight in paper and protection. At least 500 patents were passed between 1474 and 1600. It's great, it's good to know. But it's next to impossible to understand which one of these was first. Not many of them are recorded. And what's more, based on one of our rules, a third party, in many cases, was actually granted patent protection for something they didn't invent. What's more, some of the patents, based on what the historical documents show, some of the patents are stuff that wouldn't be patented today. There was the hope for perpetual motion was patented. Basically, perpetual motion being the ability for something to both create and use energy at the same time, akin to a car filling itself up with gas as it's driving on the freeway. In 1449, roughly 25 years after Brunelleschi started his dome and only a few years after it was completed, patent protection was offered to a man named John of Utnam. Now, in exchange for producing stained glass windows at a local college, John, we'll call him, was granted a 20-year patent for his work. This is widely recognized as the first patent in England and maybe ever. The issue is that it was distributed by the royal court, which has something of a checkered history. The royal court, historically, at least in the 15th, 16th century, would grant patents for pretty much everyday things in exchange for money. Basically, what the court would do is they would give patents to anybody who was loyal enough and who would give them enough cash. It was such a corrupt practice that in 1624, the UK government recognized, okay, enough's enough. We're going to put our own act out there that prevents royalty from making these artificial monopolies. And this act was called the Statute of Monopolies of 1624. And Section 6 of this Statute of Monopolies is widely referred to today in many, many countries' patent law. It's still difficult to find a definitive number one patent after the Statute of Monopolies in 1624. It's not for a lack of inventions. You have, for instance, Sir Isaac Newton's telescope was invented and presented to society in 1672. It's one of the most remarkable inventions of all time, but he didn't patent it. Many inventors, in fact, didn't patent their inventions. There's a number of reasons we can surmise, one being that many of these inventions were for science, not for commercial usage. No one's gonna make 100, 200, 500 telescopes in that day and age. But number two, there was a great deal of difficulty, even if you had a piece of paper, in protecting and enforcing that patent. It wasn't until really the Industrial Revolution, when things started getting cooking, there was a plow that was invented. Yeah, that's makes it easier to make food. You can sell food, there's a commercial purpose there. There was the steam engine that was created by James Watt. He basically created the unit of the horsepower. And in turn, he was the person that we named the power unit Watt after. With the rise of industrial production in the 18th and 19th century, it created a more robust system of IP protection. We really, really need a branch or an office, some type of unit that can make sure that these are properly enforced. Enter the United States. In 1790, both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson signed the first patent that went to Samuel Hopkins. Yeah, that's Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State at the time. George Washington was obviously the president. And this patent alone represents one of the few, maybe the first, documents signed by both men. Yeah, the Declaration of Independence wasn't signed by both men. This Constitution wasn't signed by both men. The Declaration, George Washington was at war. The Constitution, Thomas Jefferson was in France. Despite all this, the significance here of the moment is that the US had its two most important people signing off on patents. Thomas Jefferson basically oversaw patents from the get-go, and he was an inventor of his own right. He liked to tinker and evolve different things that people had invented. So it's likely he enjoyed being the head person of this office. However, it didn't take long for many people to realize that, say, maybe we shouldn't have the Secretary of State being in charge of patents. So what this meant some 30, 40 years later is the passage of the Patent Act of 1836, which creates the first modern patent office, patent number 1. Hold the phone. The Samuel Hopkins guy, I just said he had the first patent in United States history. This is true. 1790, signed by, the big tuna, all of the guys, they signed it. Okay, well, does he not have the first? It was a 15, 20 years, all that, yeah. The issue is that Samuel Hopkins patent, often dubbed X000001, that patent and 9,957 patents that came after it, which is prior to the Patent Act of 1836 in the United States, all those patents were recognized. They also burned to the ground. But without this fire, it'd be interesting to know if we would still have the so-called X patents, those 9,957 patents that went down to the ground. All that said, they're no more. The first patent that is part of the patent numbering system in the United States today, patent number 1 of what is now over 10 million patents, was given to Senator John Ruggles. He created a traction wheel for steam locomotives. I have no idea what that is, but that's what it was. The point is, the interesting thing is that Senator Ruggles, he was the father of this patent office. So he created the patent office and then turned around and received the first patent. Cheating? Maybe. The first patent? Yeah. Technically. And if we were to answer the question that commenced this video, what was the first patent in history based on our rules? It's not Brunelleschi's dome, but it has to be John Utnam of the UK, based on what we've set forth. But the first modern patent is John Ruggles, because his still exists. It didn't go up in flames. So the story of the first patent demonstrates that patents are not static. They, like new inventions, are dynamic and always evolving, as are the systems needed to protect them. As technology evolves and who can create things comes to the forefront, we're really at an intersection here as to who and what deserves patent protection. So now you know the story of the first patents in history. I'm Paul Nyhart, I'm your host. I'm gonna remind you, be first when you should, be last when you should. I'll see you next time.